Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, it's finally voting day in Israel, again. Millions of citizens casting their votes and enjoying the day off from work. Meanwhile, additional improvements on the pandemic front as more and more reopens to those with green passes in their pockets. And finally, despite the coronavirus and repeat elections, Israel rising in the ranks as one of the happiest nations on earth. The day has finally come. Israelis returning to the ballot boxes for the fourth time in 2 years as politicians continue to campaign as much as they're legally allowed. It's that time of year again. Some 6.5 million eligible voters pouring into 13,685 polling stations across the country in Israel's fourth parliamentary elections in under 2 years' time. And this including 751 voting stations dedicated for COVID-19 patients and those in self-isolation. One station even at the Ben Gurion International Airport. But as with the previous votes, this election again largely seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with his critics, including left-wing voters and right-wing defectors, condemning the premier as a criminal.
או יש עתיד גדולה, או ממשלה של חושך וגזענות והומופוביה, שתיקח את הכסף של אנשים עובדים ותעביר אותו לאנשים שלא עובדים, שלא תעבוד בשביל הציבור האמיתי שמחזיק את המדינה הזו בחיים. האנשים שעובדים, משלמים מיסים, משרתים בצבא.
That said, while Lapid is calling on the anti-Netanyahu bloc to join together beneath his leadership in ousting Netanyahu, Bennett and Sar are still taking swipes at one another and endangering the likelihood of a real anti-Netanyahu partnership. Sar, for one, blasting Bennett for failing in his leadership and in standing up to pressure, after Bennett's vowing not to sit in a coalition where Yair Lapid is prime minister. Sar, for his part, saying he's not limiting his options as long as Netanyahu is replaced, while Bennett is replying to Sar's criticism, saying that he's still interested in ousting Netanyahu, but that it's ultimately up to the public and that he'll not rule anything out just yet. Meanwhile, right-wing voters are essentially hailing Netanyahu as a hero, especially in the wake of the pandemic and with none playing the pandemic card as well as the prime minister himself.
מי ימשיך להביא מיליוני חיסונים?
אנחנו מדינה של חיסונים. יש לנו חיסונים לכל אזרח, לכולם.
תעלו תעמו. תעלו תעמו. חיסונים לכולם, לכו להתחסן. מיליוני החיסונים שהבאנו. יש חיסון לכל אזרח, לכל אזרחית. החיסונים גם יגיעו אליכם הביתה. אנחנו היחידים שיכולים להצליח, כי הבאתי מיליוני חיסונים. ואני אומר לכל מי שלא יתחסן עכשיו, כל מי שלא יתחסן, תלכו להתחסן.
Not everyone is convinced, though, leaving predictions just as up in the air as they've ever been.
Very happy with what he's done. I myself got vaccinated, but it didn't actually change my opinion. I'm still not going to vote for him. There's still enough reasons to vote for one of the opposing parties. But I can still be very, very happy with the vaccines that he brought to Israel.
Well, Netanyahu's slogan, I brought vaccinations, vote for me, is a very nice slogan. I believe it might work for many people. I just got vaccinated this morning. Thank you to all the people involved in bringing the vaccinations, but for Netanyahu, I will never vote. Nope.
Still, with early results at the polls this morning already suggesting a slight gain in the Likud's favor, it would appear that the campaign is working, with just 40% of Israelis considering Netanyahu's crisis management a failure, down from 60% only a few weeks ago.
I think this campaign is helping Netanyahu a lot. There was a huge debate in Israel whether the vaccinations is a personal achievement of Netanyahu or whether any person that would have been the head of Israel at that time could have bring the vaccines, because it's a very developed country, it's a small country, it has a developed health system. And just a few days ago, CEO of Pfizer said in a TV interview that Netanyahu was obsessive about the vaccines and he counted on him to get the job done. And this was a turning point in Netanyahu's campaign, which is now claiming, I will also be obsessive about the economy and other things that are very important to the Israelis.
אני שמח להיות איתכם כאן. אני מבקש מכם, אתם רוצים עוד בחירות? לא. אתם רוצים ממשלת ליכוד? אתם רוצים ממשלת לפיד? לא. אתם רוצים ממשלת ימין יציבה? צריך ללכת מחר ולהביא לקלפי מה כאן, מה
In related news, as millions of Israelis head to the polls, ILTV took to the streets to find out just how they're planning to vote. So, over 6.5 million Israelis are eligible to vote today. But who are they voting for and why?
And I'm voting for Bibi because coming from Belgium, it's so important to have a good, strong personality in front of Israel on the international scheme. So that's why I'm voting for him.
I'm voting for Bibi Netanyahu and for Shas because Bibi is a magician in politics. What he did with vaccine was brilliant. What he did with Middle East relation was brilliant also. So, what else?
אני הצבעתי ליברמן. ליברמן יש לו את המדיניות שהכי מתאימה לי מבחינת ליברליות, ציוניות, שוויון, ובמיוחד בנושא החרדים, שהגיע הזמן שהמדיניות שם תשתנה. לא ייתכן שבן אדם ילך לצבא ואחד אחר לא, אחד יעבוד, ישלם מיסים ואחד לא. זה צריך פשוט לחלק את העוגה בצורה שווה וליצור פה את האיזון, מה שאין איזון כבר 14 שנה.
I already voted this morning to Meretz because I want to empower the left wing.
This time I voted for Yair Lapid, which was like a last-minute decision. Actually, I'm more aligned with Labor, but I took a more strategic approach this time to really try to bring a change, and hopefully he will get enough votes to form a coalition.
So then what are voters' biggest concerns in this coming election?
That there's no one better than Bibi. There's not a person that can actually replace him. They're all talking, but I don't believe that they can actually do the work that he puts in.
שאנשים לא ילכו להצביע ושאנשים יהיו מיואשים.
שיהיו פתקים לבנים בבחירות, או למשל כמו שהיה עם טראמפ, שהתחילו להפגין ולעשות בלגן בגלל שהיו איזה שהם בעיות בקלפי וכו'.
And joining me now with more on Election Day 2021, we have Rabbi Dov Lipman, former Yesh Atid Party Knesset member and Secretary General of the Confederation of United Zionists. And then there's Jeremy Saltan, political strategist, Director of English Operations, and Knesset candidate for the Yamina Party. Thank you both so much for being with us today. All right. Now,
great to be with you.
Now I want to ask first, what do voters care about, okay? Which party addresses these needs best? We saw earlier people are very concerned about the economy, of course, coronavirus, but less so now that the pandemic is slightly waning in Israel. So, who is going to answer Israelis' needs best? Rabbi, I'll start with you.
The amazing thing is the conversations that I hear are yes Netanyahu or no Netanyahu, and we hear very little about people drilling down to the details. All the candidates tried to put their plans out there. We have Jeremy here. Naftali Bennett's party certainly put out its Singapore plan. New Hope put out plans. Netanyahu responded with plans. Yesh Atid has plans. But people that are talking to me, people are thinking about strategy, how to make sure that either Netanyahu continues or Netanyahu doesn't continue, and trying to figure out who to vote based on that. And I'll tell you something, Aaron, people are not decided up till the very last second for this election, much more than other ones that we've experienced.
Jeremy, would you agree with that people are basically just voting strategically to get Netanyahu out, or are they voting at least mostly along party lines that they agree with?
What I've seen, and I started, the early morning in Mevaseret Zion where I live, and then I was in Ma'ale Adumim in the late morning, and then Jerusalem in the afternoon, is that people are looking for stability. They're looking for strength. And yeah, the voters I've spoken to, the ones that are still the undecideds, and going in today, we know that there are up to 15 seats of people who are making their decision today on election day. They do care about issues. It's true what Dov said. There are people who they buy into the yes Bibi, no Bibi thing. Those people knew who they were voting for 4 elections ago, to be quite honest with you. When we're talking about the undecided voters, what they care about is who is going to be able to bring us a stable government, who's going to be able to actually go ahead and get us our jobs back, take care of the economy. We were talking about Corona beforehand. What we're feeling right now is the economic, harsh reality that the Corona has dealt with. So even if a lot of people are not worried about the health aspect, the economic one is real. When we came out with our plan to go ahead and create 400,000 new jobs, that was a very bold plan. There's a reason why after we put out our plan, everyone else realized they had to put up something also to address the issues. If this wasn't about issues, if there was no policy in this election, then no one else would have responded to this. So again, the key on a day like today is the undecideds, and those are the people who care about the issues.
Well, but of course, again, and I'm glad you brought up the economy, because a recent report is saying that the unemployment rate in Israel is still over 15%, which is very, very high, especially compared to before the pandemic. So, you know, what plan do you believe will address the economy and the unemployment rate better? I know, Jeremy, you just mentioned your plan to bring several 100,000 jobs. Rabbi, I'll turn back to you for now to answer the question first.
There's no doubt that especially small business owners are suffering terribly. And I do give credit to Naftali Bennett for very much bringing this issue to the fore and doing that throughout the corona crisis. There's no doubt that there needs to be a change in the VAT, the taxes, lowering people's taxes, giving people incentives, giving people the ability to learn new trades, learn new careers. People have seen their businesses just collapse all around them, businesses they've had for decades. And there's no doubt that people who have small businesses have taken a look at those plans and are trying to understand who can help them the most. And there's no doubt that there has been significant debate. And again, parties have put out plans about these issues. The one thing that I always point out to the voters is remember that we have a coalition system. And even if you have the best plans in the world, it still makes a difference who you're sitting with, what ministries you have, what level of control you have in that coalition to make a difference. And that's why who is at the top of the coalition, who is there running it, makes a very big difference. And therefore, thinking about who you want to be prime minister or in senior minister positions is also very, very important as you go to vote.
Well, so follow up, who would be your dream coalition? Forget all of the back and forth between all of the different parties and their high school-ish drama. Assuming everybody is an adult and can make compromises, who would be in your dream coalition?
Yeah, so to me, a dream coalition is one that can actually pass a state budget. I mean,
well, so who's in it though? Who's in your budget?
No. So I'm going to tell you. But I'm saying before I explain to you which parties are going to be there, one that can actually go ahead and literally pass a state budget. We are the only country around the globe that did not pass a state budget for 2020. Forget about the fact that we're already deep into 2021 without having one. Listen, in order to do it, you need to be able to do something that no one else has been willing to do. And that is to go into both the Bibi bloc and the anti-Bibi bloc and bring it together and bring parties from both sides and create a stable coalition and stop with this Bibi, not Bibi stuff. Because if we go ahead and continue in that direction, we're not going to be able to go ahead and form a coalition. Who are the partners that we can go ahead and do that? Anybody who agrees that passing a state budget is a fundamental reason to go ahead and put all of our right, left, Bibi, anti-Bibi arguments to the side and actually go to work for the Israeli people who are voting today to send people to work for them, not people to go ahead and work for themselves.
All right. Well, unfortunately, I have to end it right now. But, gentlemen, thank you both so much for being with us again. And I hope to see you very soon for our live election coverage. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Moving on, security on Election Day is also a very hot topic as the IDF imposes closures on all crossings with the West Bank and the Gaza Strip until after the vote tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, upwards of 20,000 police officers have also been deployed to the various ballot stations, particularly those flagged as potential flashpoints. And this includes thousands of officers with body cameras as well as undercover teams working to prevent any tampering or fraud. But perhaps most alarming is the potential for digital manipulations, with reports from as early as last year alleging that Israel is the #1 target for hackers and other cyber criminals. And already gaping holes in security are becoming evident. At least 2 databases published online on the day before elections again, including names, ballot numbers, ID numbers, home addresses, and more. And with us now to discuss Israel's growing cyber insecurity, journalist at CTech by Kalkalist, James Spiro. James, thank you so much for being with us. Now, why is Israel the #1 target for international hackers? Do international hackers, and the recent leak of Israel's voter registry have anything to do with one another?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. It's we've raised to number one in the terror in the cybersecurity threat list, and it's not necessarily good news for Israel. Obviously, I mean, F5 Labs identified about 180,000 hacking attempts on Israel just in 2020 alone. So there are a few reasons for this. The first could be the changing US administration. Often when America changes leadership, that has ramifications across the Middle East, as well as, of course, the Abraham Accords, which, while was pretty amazing and symbolic for Israel, Israel's neighbors weren't so happy with it. Of course, there's also the geopolitical tactic of humiliation. Someone may want to just attack Israel to humiliate its citizens and make it look weak and kind of embarrassed.
And so, you know, again, do you think that the fact that Israel is the number one targeted country for cyber hacking and the recent leaks or the recent new leaks, you know, because this has happened before, of Israel's registry, voter registry, do you think that those are in any way related?
So, yeah, it's embarrassing because this has happened before. We've had 4 elections in 2 years, and the last election in March 2020 also had some of the same issues. It's hard to tell about whether or not they're connected. We can assume that cyber attacks on Israel will remain stubborn and they'll remain ongoing. So I've spoken to quite a few cybersecurity firms in Israel, such as Guardicore and Kaspersky in the past. They seem to say that they've confirmed cyber attacks, or at least attempted cyber attacks, from regions like North Korea, Hezbollah, Russia, and Iran, you know, the usual suspects. It's impossible to say whether or not this attack, again, has been connected to any other attack, but it's pretty safe to say that Israel has at least a group of of enemies that like to kind of test its boundaries.
So how worried should the average Israeli on the street be about this new information that you're bringing to light, and what can they do about it?
So I suppose on a consumer level, individuals and users can do everything they can for their own personal passwords. So making sure your personal passwords are different from one another because you're likely using the same email address. So logging onto things like Spotify, Dropbox, maybe things with sensitive information. It's important to change those passwords frequently and keep them different from one another. In terms of the hacks we've just seen, unfortunately, there's not much Israelis can do in terms of the information that's been leaked. The best thing that can happen is for these companies that keep on getting hacked is to secure their information. So it's really difficult to show these online companies just how important cybersecurity is. It's very easy when you have a physical store to kind of convince the shop owner that he or she may need an alarm system or that he or she may need bars on the windows to protect criminals. Now, to protect criminals from coming in, I should say. People and companies that run these online places, it's quite difficult to convince them that they do need added security measures. And I think that things like this are sadly going to continue happening until measures are taken.
All right, James, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And now for our daily COVID update. Thankfully, more good news. Israeli infection numbers are dropping to the lowest they've been since November 2020. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
Israel's landmark coronavirus pandemic response gaining more and more traction by the day. The latest health ministry numbers reporting an overnight infection rate of just 1.5%, making for the lowest rate since November 17th of last year. This as active infections likewise dropping to 14,679, roughly 500 in serious condition, and the death toll rising by 16 since Monday to 6,114. Meanwhile, as for those who've recovered from the virus or who've been inoculated against it, the world is opening up. Authorities at Ben Gurion International Airport saying they expect upwards of 7,700 people to pass through the terminal just today, 5,100 of whom are departing. And where to, you ask? Well, in addition to a surprising jump in the number of private flights in and out of the country, commercial airliners will today begin flights to Greece, ferrying up to 10,000 Israelis per week. This as Greece announcing that Israeli Green Pass holders may now enter the country without having to isolate. And many other countries are expected to soon follow suit, including the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Russia, Italy, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Thailand, and a number of other countries in the EU. Then, for Green Pass holders looking for a slightly closer destination, Israel's similarly opening up the Taba crossing with Egypt as soon as this weekend, allowing up to 350 Israeli tourists into the beautiful Sinai Peninsula every day.
Finally, for today, despite the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, repeating elections, high cost of living, and constant security threats, Israel has still been ranked as the 11th happiest nation in the world, according to the latest World Happiness Reports. And the ranking is a notable increase from 2020, when the country ranked 14th place. But due to the pandemic, the data was also compiled differently this year. For one, researchers were unable to do face-to-face interviews in several countries, and the correlation between COVID-19 and overall well-being became the main focus for most respondents. Still, various other factors were taken into account in determining the measure of well-being, including GDP per capita, life expectancy, social support, freedom to make life choices, generosity, corruption perception, and trust in government institutions. The United States, meanwhile, is now at number 14, beating out Canada in 15th place, and the most unhappy country, unfortunately, is Afghanistan, retaining its place at the bottom of the list at number 149. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Always a pleasure, Aaron. Tonight and tomorrow, you can expect clouds and showers, with this evening calling for continued warm lows in the 50s or the teens in Celsius. Then tomorrow, cooling off slightly from today's highs, you can expect temperatures in the 50s and 60s in the northern and central regions, and the 70s and 80s in the southern region, or mid-teens to the 20s in Celsius. Back to the studio.
Always a pleasure indeed. And now, before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. This is so true. I can never find the plug when I'm not looking at it. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.3 shekels to the American dollar and 2.62 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and to our homepage at iltv.tv. And of course, stay tuned for our live election night coverage on our Facebook and YouTube channels later tonight at 9:30 p.m. Israel time. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.
Make a wish, you'll see it's everything we want it to be. Make a